I have some spectacular news. A few hours ago, Kathleen Kennedy and Bob Iger stopped by my house. They wanted me to know that they listened to the podcast, liked what they heard, and are making me the new president of Lucasfilm. They want me to be the head honcho, the big brain, the one who calls the shots, sets the direction for the Star Wars franchise, and chooses which stories the team will tell next. Apparently, Star Wars has been struggling a bit. I know, I was shocked to hear that as well. And Lucasfilm is shifting its content strategy once again, producing fewer series for its streaming service and returning to theaters with 2-hour movies that take place in a galaxy far, far away. And I know that galaxy pretty well. I grew up in the era of the original trilogy. The Empire Strikes Back has been my favorite movie since I was a child. The Kenner action figures are my favorite toys of all time, and ones I still collect to this day. I've watched every movie and series from the Disney era. I've been collecting modern Star Wars prototypes for nearly a decade now. I've written for the Star Wars Collectors Archive, attended conventions and collector-themed events, and I've been a part of this wonderful community of fans and collectors. And I host a podcast too. You may have heard of it. It's about Star Wars. And now, I have the chance to help get Lucasfilm back on track and to return Star Wars to greatness. I want to reconnect a fan base spanning generations with what they first loved about it. I want to remind fans why Star Wars is so special. And I want to establish a consistency in the storytelling, with an emphasis on imagination and quality. I want Star Wars to be the #1 sci-fi brand again. Actually, let's think bigger. I want it to be the greatest brand in the world. I want every tale we tell to feel like Star Wars. No, wait, I don't want it to feel like Star Wars. I want it to be Star Wars. And I want you to want to experience all of it. Here's the catch, though. Bob and Kathy, she told me to call her Kathy, Bob and Kathy are in a bit of a crunch. Disney's stock is floundering once again. The response to the latest Mandalorian and Grogu trailer was not what they were expecting, and they need someone to turn the brand around as quickly as possible. So they've given me 3 months to come up with a strategy. This is the type of challenge I enjoy. This is the goal, to find the heart of Star Wars again. This is how you and I will illuminate the path for the franchise to follow. And this is Star Wars, Prototypes and Production.
From Coruscant to Tatooine, and every planet in between, Star Wars, Prototypes and Production, with your host, David Quinn.
Vader.
It's a trap!
Yes, Master.
Whoa, we're gonna have company!
Have to stand and fight.
The more you tighten your grip, Dark, the more star systems will slip through your fingers.
I want to learn the ways of the Force and become a Jedi like my father.
The Force will be with you, always.
Okay, so I'm about to become the next president of Lucasfilm. And I'd like you to be part of my team. Star Wars is all about the power of imagination, right? So let's put that imagination to good use. Let's brainstorm about what it would be like to actually be in that position, to help fix something that is largely broken. Broken may be too harsh of a term. It's more like a disconnect. The signal is pretty weak at the moment, and we need to get to a higher ground to restore that connection again. And a higher vantage point may bring a clearer perspective as well. So before we begin, What was the inspiration for this exercise? Well, earlier in the week, actor John Boyega appeared in a panel at the Florida SuperCon 2025 convention. Reflecting on his time as Finn in the Star Wars sequel trilogy, he offered his take on what he would have done differently with the films. Boyega said, "If I was a producer on Star Wars from the beginning, you would have had a whole completely different thing. It would be mad. First of all, we're not getting rid of Han Solo, Luke Skywalker, all these people. We're not doing that. The first thing we're going to do is fulfill their story, fulfill their legacy. We're going to make a good moment of handing on the baton. Our new characters will not be overpowered in these movies. They won't just grab stuff and know what to do with it. No, you've got to struggle like every other character in this franchise. I'd do that. I'd look to the Old Republic stories and see what we can add to the continuation of that. I would definitely want to see the Force Unleashed stories in there. I would try to expand the Star Wars universe as much as possible while respecting the lore. If we're expanding the lore, we have to do it within the respective boundaries that stay true. But Luke Skywalker wouldn't be disappearing on a rock. Hell no. Standing there and he's like a projector? I would want to give those characters way more. Way more. Boyega is one of us. He's a Star Wars fan who also happened to star in one of the biggest film trilogies of all time. And I really appreciated hearing his thoughts about the franchise. I've argued for a long time that Luke, Han, and Leia did not need to die. They're the types of characters who should live forever, beyond the end credits. And Boyega is correct. The tension and challenges should have weighed more heavily on the newer main characters, like Finn, Rey, and Poe. The film should have focused more on their arcs and developing them into the heroes they deserve to be. I liked his call to explore previously established stories, especially ones that were introduced as video games or novels, and whose characters and contents would electrify a film or a series. After reading Boyega's remarks, I began to consider what I would do if I were in that position. If I were a decision maker within the offices of Lucasfilm. And the concept was incredibly intriguing. And it would be a fun exercise, even if it was only a pretend challenge. Here's what I'd do to bring Star Wars back to greatness again. To begin this exercise, I constructed a few guidelines. First, I wanted to limit the time frame. If I had years to plan a strategy, I would attempt to write a trilogy myself. But I wanted to show you and others that turning around the franchise could be done quickly and logically. That it's likely easier to do than the current leadership would have you believe. And that these proposed ideas would be satisfying to your average Star Wars fan. Second, I wanted to focus on ideas that the Lucasfilm team could realistically execute, especially in a shorter time frame. So that meant leaning on previously established stories to set a foundation, around which a larger strategy could take shape. And realistically, developing projects based on those stories would give Lucasfilm time to create all new ones. So my suggestions wouldn't be anything too over the top, like bringing George Lucas back to write another trilogy or rebooting the sequel trilogy. Those are ideas for fun conversations among fans. But I wanted to present projects that I could realistically produce if I were Lucasfilm's leader. And third, I wanted to work alongside the upcoming content Lucasfilm has officially announced and is actually producing. So my suggestions would complement releases like Ahsoka Season 2, Visions, Maul Shadow Lord as streaming offerings, and The Mandalorian and Grogu and Star Wars Starfighter as theatrical ones. This is really an exercise to test if it's possible to restore a franchise like Star Wars and to recapture an audience thirsting for the next adventure. Because the question is if I, as a hardcore Star Wars fan, can provide some sort of logical direction or solution, why is Lucasfilm failing to do so? My goal immediately upon stepping into the position as Lucasfilm's new president would be to develop content that reminds fans why Star Wars has been so special, and to do it in an intentional and consistent way, to rebuild that relationship that is fractured over the last 10 years. I want to reward longtime fans for their commitment to the brand, and I want to worry less about trying to appeal to everyone. Because when that often becomes the focus, you wind up with content that doesn't satisfy anyone. Instead, I want to put characters and story at the forefront. The archetypes and the shared experiences will be the unifying features of a Star Wars story, as they were with the 1977 film. But a more generalized audience will be drawn to the films and series based on the depth of the overall viewing experience and the reaction of the core fanbase. And there will be a strong emphasis on delivering premium quality, regardless of the genre or type of story Lucasfilm tells. Project number 1, The Old Republic. The first thing I would do would be to return to the foundation that has driven Star Wars storytelling for almost 50 years. And that would entail establishing a team to focus on bringing the Knights of the Old Republic to the big screen. In case you're not familiar, the Knights of the Old Republic was a video game series. It debuted in 2003, with a sequel game in 2004, and the third chapter in 2011. Taking place thousands of years before the Battle of Yavin, a player trains in the ways of the Jedi while searching for a Jedi Knight named Bastila Shan, and stopping Sith Lord Darth Malak and his military in the process. The sequels introduced villains like Darth Nihilus and Darth Malgus, and had a unique focus on a character named Revan, who was Malak's master. The games were a massive success, making the world of the Old Republic one of the most exciting eras in the Star Wars universe. And that's why I believe it is the perfect starting point for a film trilogy. The comic series Tales of the Jedi covered events leading up to the video games, and more comics and books continued the Old Republic in the following years. Recently, we've seen Revan, Malak, Malgus, and Bastila Shan become action figures in the Vintage Collection and in the Black Series toy lines. The characters still resonate with Star Wars fans, and their designs are at once wholly reminiscent of what we love about the franchise, yet they still feel fresh and exciting. And the best part is that this video game series straddles a rare line that makes it perfect for a big screen transition. The Old Republic is a vastly beloved property. The first two games are now more than 20 years old. They have earned a passionate following, but at the same time, there's a generation or two that likely have never played them. They know the characters from the toy lines, but they don't know their histories. They don't know the story of the Old Republic. So this is the rare Star Wars brand that is somewhat familiar and could become a film trilogy without being a reboot or a remake of a previous film or series. The characters already resonate with audiences, and the story does not need to follow the path of the video games step by step. Instead, the Lucasfilm story team can select the best parts of it for the movies. They can introduce additional characters, new plot twists, and a narrative that injects a new life into an older property. The 2003 video game included a pretty stunning twist. While it would still be fascinating to use as a plot point, the interesting part would no longer be the impact of the twist itself on the audience, but how the characters react to it in a film. But the trilogy would be character-driven in a way that it wouldn't have to rely on twists or special effects to draw audiences to the theater. so kicking off the Old Republic film trilogy would be the first project for the turnaround. However, I wouldn't announce it publicly until all 3 scripts had been created. I would want to know that it was on track and that each chapter could stand with the best Star Wars stories. Currently, under the leadership of Kathleen Kennedy, writer and producer Simon Kinberg is crafting his own trilogy. Kinberg worked on the X-Men and Deadpool films. For Star Wars, he served as executive producer on the animated series Star Wars Rebels. In my opinion, Rebels produced the best ensemble of characters since the original 1977 Star Wars movie. And Kinberg played a role in overseeing and shaping that ensemble, which gives me hope for his project. In a recent interview with Screen Rant, Kinberg shared his approach to writing a live-action Star Wars trilogy. He said, "My favorite of the Star Wars movies is Empire Strikes Back, and it's because the balance between the epic and the intimate is so strong in that they're such personal stories. The stakes are really personal, and yet, obviously, there's all kinds of great science fiction. I think Andor did an extraordinary job of that as well. It was such an emotional, intense, personal show that also had, obviously, massive stakes to it, and politics, and all of that." So from a realistic standpoint, if Kinberg's project has some traction in the writing stage, and if he sees a direction for a future trilogy, I'd want to support it. And developing a separate trilogy on previously established materials set in the Old Republic era would give Kinberg the time he needs to craft his trilogy, which may stand as episodes 10 through 12 in the Skywalker saga, and would introduce a new collection of characters. Project number 2, Lost Stars. The next project I'd want to develop would be centered around a Star Wars novel, one that would be perfect for a standalone film or a multi-episode series. The book is titled Lost Stars. Written by Claudia Gray and released in 2015, it offered something rarely seen in modern Star Wars storytelling: a love story. An epic love story. I know, I just lost you. I came out swinging with Darth Revan, Jedi Knights, and lightsabers, and then I had to bring romance into the picture. But this isn't the type of Hallmark drama that you tolerate because your significant other wants to watch it. Lost Stars tells the story of Thane Kyrell and Sienna Rhee, a boy and girl from 2 distinct regions of the same planet, who trained together to become cadets and eventually pilots for the Galactic Empire. They follow a similar path, and along the way realize that the deep friendship they formed as children has become much more than a friendship in their young adult years. But something fractures that relationship and sends them on separate paths. Their story is told through the lens of the events of the original trilogy, and how those battles and moments shape each of them and their relationship together. And in many ways, this is what Star Wars is missing: a love story. Before you roll your eyes for the 10th time, think back to the original trilogy. Whether or not you realized it at the time, the love story between Han and Leia in The Empire Strikes Back supercharged that film. It made many of us want to be Han Solo, on an adventure with a sharp, beautiful, savvy woman by our side. It elevated the connection between the characters and raised the stakes. The Lost Stars novel offers an organic love story set against a galactic background and featuring 2 talented, driven, genuine, and honorable characters. It avoids the damsel in distress tropes and delivers a personal connection that seems to pull them together at different points in the galaxy. And that's something fresh that a modern Star Wars story can deliver. It's an element that draws in an audience for series and for film franchises, where the theme is romantic love. It's an aspect that fans cling to, that they obsess over, and that weaves a bond between them and the characters. Because a love story centers around hope, which has always been one of the tenets of Star Wars. So a Lost Stars adaptation could be a standalone film, in the vein of Rogue One or Solo, a Star Wars story. But I personally believe it would be better as a season of a television series, one that could stretch into 3 or 4 seasons if the writers can expand on the events of the book in a fuller and more impactful way. And that would help to solve a few of Lucasfilm's issues. How to get teens and 20-somethings to care about Star Wars? Give them a realistic love story. How to get them to return again and again to watch? Give them multiple episodes of a powerful love story. How to go beyond the male-skewing base and appeal to more female fans? A love story. The relationship between Bix Caldine and Cassian Andor across 2 seasons of Andor is the most recent example of this in Star Wars. Their connection was part of the story, but it wasn't the central theme. But it certainly resonated with the audience. And I think Lost Stars could take that type of love to the next level. Lost Stars also has something special working for it that would make it further appeal to Star Wars fans. Along the course of the original trilogy's events, Thane and Sierra meet with characters from the films, ones that impact each of their lives in meaningful ways. I don't want to spoil any of the interactions if you haven't already read the book, but I think viewers familiar with the trilogy would enjoy seeing these characters again on screen. And those interactions make sense in the story, without feeling wedged or forced. Wait, did I just say wedged or forced? Are those intentional Star Wars puns? Probably. Finally, the novel also touches upon the Battle of Jakku, known as the Empire's Last Stand. I think the battle, which has been covered in the comics, may also make a good standalone film or a series, and would be worth exploring by the Lucasfilm team. And the Lost Stars story could also serve as an organic tie-in to that Jakku film or series. Letting the past die. A quick aside, I've heard some fans calling for the sequel trilogy to be removed from the canonical Star Wars timeline, or to be rebooted. I don't think this will ever actually happen, and I don't know if I would want Lucasfilm to actually go through with it. I think the company not only ruined the characters and the trilogy, but by showing us a largely unsatisfactory ending of the Skywalker saga, I don't know how many fans want to continue on the journey leading up to the sequels. I believe there are ways to redeem some of the characters and to make the outcomes a little more impactful and resonant, like the way the Clone Wars animated series fleshed out what the prequels lacked. But it seems like the audience has spoken, and they're not really interested in fleshing out the sequel trilogy storylines. So, in trying to restore Star Wars back to glory, I want to lean into what has worked, and what I believe fans like myself would want to experience. I'm steering clear of outside agendas, politics, and social messages, and am focusing on simply telling solid stories in the Star Wars universe. Eliminating the sequel trilogy or trying to rework what has been released in shows and in theaters won't work. It will be messy and confusing, and may set a bad precedent that something you love could be wiped from the Star Wars canonical timeline if it underperforms or upsets a portion of the base. As Yoda tells Luke in The Last Jedi, failure is the greatest teacher. We accept the stumbles, we acknowledge them, and we simply move on from them, focusing on something better. Instead, those weaker films, books, and series will still exist, but we won't waste time trying to repair them, or to make you as an audience member appreciate them. It's not worth putting hundreds of millions of dollars into patching up problematic or hastily composed content. We don't have time. The audience doesn't have patience for that either. They're not going to stick around if every story Lucasfilm tells leads into a trilogy they disliked, as the company attempts to make it more palatable. Instead, we move forward, and we embrace the best characters and best stories we have to offer as a studio. Project number 3, Dark Disciple. The next resource I would tap into would be Christine Golden's 2015 novel, Dark Disciple. The novel is based on an 8-episode arc that was planned for the Clone Wars animated series, but was never produced. But it captures the essence that made the series so memorable. Like Lost Stars, it has become a fan-favorite Star Wars story, and has developed a passionate following. It also seems like the perfect vehicle for an on-screen adaptation, especially since it originated as 8 Clone Wars scripts. And at its core, it is also a relationship story, centering on 2 beloved characters from the Clone Wars, Quinlan Vos and the Night Sister, Asajj Ventress. Wanting to end the Clone Wars, the Jedi Council weighs assassinating Count Dooku after witnessing a genocidal separatist attack on the planet Mahani. The Council asks Quinlan Vos to seek out the former Sith apprentice turned bounty hunter Asajj Ventress, to hunt down her former master Count Dooku and to kill him. In case you haven't read it yet, that's as far as I'll go with the description. Dark Disciple offers its audience another gripping tale, one that explores a complex relationship between Ventress and Vos, one that puts the dark in Dark Disciple. To put a spark into Star Wars, Dark Disciple could become a stylized animated film, in the vein of Sony's Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse movies. The cost would be far lower than any of the live-action films, and it would appeal to fans of both the prequels and the Clone Wars. At the same time, it would attract those who have read the book, but it would also appeal to fans who may never read it. Ultimately, I would love to fold in that storyline to a continuation of the animated Clone Wars series for the streaming service, one that would cover stories never told within that timeline, like the 2012 comic Maul, Son of Dathomir, which concludes with an epic battle between Maul, General Grievous, Count Dooku, and Darth Sidious. And Dark Disciple could run for the 8 episodes in which it was originally structured within that series. Lucasfilm could revisit some of the unused themes and ideas that were developed but discarded once the Clone Wars was canceled in 2013. And with many of those ideas being ones suggested by George Lucas, it may draw further interest by longtime fans of the Master. So, what do you think of my strategy so far? The Old Republic, Lost Stars, and Dark Disciple seem to be 3 properties that would be pretty successful as on-screen adaptations. Each has generated a following, but I think the larger Star Wars fanbase has yet to experience them. And as the president of Lucasfilm, I want to deliver a consistent and steady flow of exciting content that works. The fact that their prior releases mitigates the risk associated with producing new content, because each has performed well, albeit with a smaller audience, and has been primed for a bigger release. I think these projects cover most of the eras of Star Wars in a compelling way. And coupled with the definitive future releases Lucasfilm is preparing, like The Mandalorian and Grogu, and Ahsoka Season 2, audiences will be able to return to many parts of the galaxy within the Star Wars timeline. The Old Republic will highlight the early battles between the Sith and the Jedi, thousands of years before the Clone Wars. And the Clone Wars stories would be told through a continuation of the Clone Wars series, with the Dark Disciple arc possibly serving as a standalone animated film. Lucasfilm is preparing to premiere another animated series, Maul Shadow Lord, in 2026, and it will follow the former Sith as he rebuilds a galactic crime syndicate. The story will take place after the events of the Clone Wars and before Maul's arc concluded in Rebels. Lost Stars, The Mandalorian and Grogu film, and Ahsoka Season 2 will focus on the era of the original trilogy and the aftermath of the fall of the Empire. And the Star Wars Starfighter film, scheduled for a May 2027 release, will tell a new story with all new characters, set in the years following the sequel trilogy. And if the early rumors from the set are true, Starfighter may have a direct tie to that trilogy. I would also consider exploring a 5th season of the Rebels show, one that follows the Ghost Crew in the years since the disappearance of Ezra and Thrawn. I would use this show to set up the master-apprentice relationship between Ahsoka and Sabine, and how it fractures leading up to the Ahsoka live-action series. For the Disney Plus streaming service, I'd create one-off shows and movies based on some of the beloved legend stories. For budget purposes, they would likely have to be released as animated content, but they would be faithful adaptations of non-canonical novels, like the original sequel to the first Star Wars film, 1978's Splinter of the Mind's Eye by Alan Dean Foster. Or they could cover a collection of stories, like Timothy Zahn's 1991 Heir to the Empire trilogy, the 1992 Dark Empire comics, James Lucerno's 2014 Tarkin novel, and the fan-favorite Darth Plagueis book, also by Lucerno. These Legends retellings could be done by different animation studios, in a similar vein to Star Wars Visions. They would excite longtime fans who yearn to finally see these stories on screen. And they would introduce a younger generation to the tales that helped shape the fandom over 5 decades. In total, I think this strategy is both effective in connecting with audiences and in meeting the needs of the fanbase. And at the same time, the projects are largely cost-efficient. I've tried to keep budgets realistic, and the plots and characters already have been developed, eliminating that stage of production. But most importantly, this slate of content would focus on a quality and consistency that is missing in the Disney-led franchise. It would highlight some of the best Star Wars stories over the years, in a greatest hits package, with some that may be new to you. And these on-screen adaptations would serve as a reminder of the wonder, thrill, and connection to a galaxy we love. Now, it's up to Lucasfilm to make that goal a reality. See you next time on Star Wars, Prototypes and Production.